Now that it was about to be over after years of putting up with every demand, every chore, every humiliating and demeaning diktat, no matter how unreasonable, all of the things that had become so familiar and so unremarkable were suddenly noticeable, like it was all new again. The slick waxy finish on his lips, the swish of a pleated skirt around his bare thighs, the click-clock of high heels as Wagner strode up the sandstone-tiled front walk and rapped intently on the imposing mahogany door. Square-tipped nails dug into his palm with each knock despite his limp wrist fist. With a flick, windswept hair tossed over his shoulder and tumbled down his back, where it tickled past the constriction of an all-too-well-fitted bra barely visible beneath an all-too-sheer ivory-white blouse. Growing impatient, he compulsively checked his watch, a thin banded timepiece gifted to him by his mother a couple birthdays past, inscribed with the initials WJB and the epitaph, "Sweet 16-foot," squeezed onto the reverse of the ovoid silver face. It hung daintily on his left forearm, his other hand reached to toy with a similarly silver hoop earring that weighed heavily on his lobe. The door creaked open. Standing on the other side was Gemma Marshall. Her easy beauty, girl-next-door sweetness that had made her the object of desire for every boy in Monroe Valley High School from her first day of freshman year to her impending graduation, the expression on her face lit up in the way it did only when she was around Wagner. "What up, girl?" Her enthusiasm was sickening, the grin that split her face malevolent. Wagner's determination wavered briefly at the sight of this girl that every other boy in his class would have done unspeakable things to be near, but a timely breeze that carried the aroma of floral perfume, the same scent dabbed on his wrists and behind his ears, steeled his nerve. "It's all over, Gemma. We're done." Her bemused smile didn't even budge a millimeter. "Oh, are we? Well, this sounds too important for the front step. Why don't you come in?" After a second of hesitation, Wagner followed her into the spacious single-level Spanish-style home. Reaching her bedroom, tucked in the back in a way enough from her parents' room that someone could cry bloody murder and nobody would hear. She closed the door anyway, for privacy or to trap the hapless boy was unclear. She turned to Wagner, hand on hip, and with a twirl of a pointed finger indicated the boy's girlish attire. "Oh, you're looking cute today. This whole schoolgirl thing was a great choice." Wagner tugged at the hem of the miniskirt, self-conscious of how much it exposed despite something similar being more or less his standard wardrobe for long enough that none of his classmates batted an eye anymore. "And I'm over here like a slob." She laughed mockingly, his dressier outfit with its pressed shirt, skirt with razor-straight pleats, and patent-polished, high-heeled Mary Jane standing in contrast to Gemma's own casual cotton tank top and frayed denim shorts. "Shut up, you know I'm only wearing this because you made me," he pouted. "I made you? I don't remember forcing you to choose the St. Trinian School for Wayward Girls uniform. You could have picked the Playboy bunny if you wanted." "Some choice," he scoffed. "I told you, I'm done with all of this now." Growing tired of the sudden defiance, Gemma's cheery demeanor dropped. "All right, princess, how about you tell me what's going on?" "Don't call me that. Sorry, I forgot you prefer Willow." The name was delivered with an acid sneer. "How insensitive of me. My name is Wagner." His voice cracked, stamping his foot with hands balled up at his sides. "Whatever you say, sweetie." Without another word, Wagner angrily plunged a hand into his purse, a dark leather bag slung over his shoulder. He pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper, the corners ripped from where he had hastily torn it off of the senior hall bulletin board, and thrust it in front of his tormentor's eyes. "What is this?" she asked. "I did it. I finally beat you." His voice trembled as if he had trouble believing his own words. "Beat me at what?" "The last chance you had for that was for prom queen, and that little ensemble you've been prancing around in this whole week is proof enough who won that." Gemma's eyebrows raised in mock realization. "Or did you want to try on my tiara? Is that why you came all the way over here? You should have just asked." This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Wagner had been imagining this confrontation the whole time as he was driving directly to Gemma's from school, or more like he had thought constantly about the moment he would finally be free from this sociopathic monster ever since that day freshman year when this all started. He was confident that nobody knew what he had done, that he had successfully made sure nobody could ever find out. Wagner was too clever to get caught, too smart, and ultimately too cocky. He didn't believe Gemma when she first approached him, speaking conspiratorially about knowing his secrets. All hope soon dashed when she then showed him the proof to back up her insinuations. What could Wagner do? She had him dead to rights, a matter so heinous that were it to get out his young life would be ruined. Give her what she wanted, do anything she asked. He was prepared to become her plaything, which suited Gemma perfectly with her disarmingly frank admission that her intention was to blackmail the boy. Was it boredom? Some say that kids tease and bully others out of misguided feelings of affection. Perhaps it was more simple, and the girl who had it all never could quite have enough, controlling a person being the pinnacle of possession, with Wagner having been the misfortunate soul who was easiest to subordinate. The early days were simple. He was to act as her lackey, carrying her books, fetching snacks and drinks, or mostly doing any basic task that she couldn't be bothered to herself. But Gemma grew tired of this. She didn't need to force somebody to be her servant when any boy she'd ever met would have happily done so at the modest price of a wink and some mild flirtation. What she needed was to demand something of Wagner that he would refuse. A teen boy's masculinity is the one thing he holds above all else, the cause of most youthful violence when threatened externally and crippling self-doubt when questioned from within. All it took was a week of wearing panties under his jeans, of constant terror of being seen by classmates or family, before she finally got the reaction she was after. What Gemma wasn't expecting was that rather than striking back or acting out, after that week had finished, her little puppet just broke. He stopped coming to school, stopped answering texts. Gemma eventually got fed up and went to his house only to find that he had shut down. Not resisting but also not complying, his only response to her was that she could let the world know his secrets since she was never going to let him be free. The rush Gemma got from seeing him so utterly defeated was unlike anything she had felt before, and it was something she wasn't sure would be so easily recaptured. She needed to keep him engaged, build him back up, remold him the way she wanted, and only then could she destroy him all over again. Be better than me. That was the order she gave her hapless toy. Beat her in anything: a foot race, video games, tiddlywinks, anything Wagner could think of, and he would be free. No strings attached, no secret double crosses, only a parting of ways. But there was one catch: anytime Wagner lost, the penalty imposed would be more severe than anything he had endured to that point. She let the contests seem competitive, always either keeping them close or waiting to reverse fortunes in a stunning comeback, but Gemma never intended to let him prevail. She savored every victory and relished each new indignity delivered. First it was at-home manicures, to be done twice weekly with a different colored polish each time. The next loss saw him getting both ears pierced. Then larger wardrobe adjustments following more defeats. By spring of that year, Wagner had a standing appointment every Saturday at the nail bar, fingers and toes, and monthly visits to the salon for any touch-ups to the Barbie pink highlights that now streaked through his ever-lengthening tresses. Somebody had to step in. Somebody would surely see that there was something amiss with a boy who never displayed the slightest hint of gender confusion, throwing himself headfirst into femininity. But instead of suspicious stylists and salesgirls looking to expel this fraud from their secret gardens, he received compliments for being brave and makeup tips that Gemma insisted he practice on his own and incorporate into his daily routine. Rather than shock and concern from parents and teachers, he was subjected to endless affirmations and encouragement in his journey, a phrase repeated to him so frequently that hearing the innocuous term cut and tore at him like swallowing glass. And while there was some teasing and snide remarks from the other kids, his proximity to Gemma kept everything at a minimum. At worst, he was thought of as a freak to be avoided. At best, he was the pity project of a wonderful girl with a big heart. If only they knew the truth. If only Wagner could tell them that none of this was his choice. That he wasn't courageous for coming out since it was his own cowardice that led to his public humiliation. That he wasn't becoming himself since he never wanted to be a girl. That he didn't want to wear makeup and dress in pastels, didn't want to be soft and pretty, that he was only one more chance away from beating Gemma and going right back to being the boy he always was. But for them to learn the truth would mean they learned the whole truth, and that would be more devastating than some people thinking that he was going through a phase in his personal development. All he could do was accept the well-meant support, go along with everything that was presented to him with the aim of easing the difficulty of what any outside observer would think was his desired transition. He couldn't let the therapist that his parents arranged for him to see know that he wasn't what he resembled, a young boy who should have been a young girl. He couldn't answer her questions honestly and did his best to appear and act the way he thought would make the sessions least difficult. By Wagner's 16th birthday, he had long since gotten used to presenting as a girl. The treatments he had been prescribed after repeated assessments had kept him from growing like the other boys, keeping his arms and legs thin and sprightly while making it so not even the faintest whisper of facial hair marred his delicate features and baby fat plumped cheeks. He was so comfortable in his role, breezing through his biannual checkup vitals, height, weight, and blood that he prattled on with the nurse and doctor in his bright, up-talking way while his mother enthusiastically described the party that night where Gemma and all his best girlfriends would be coming over. Not that they were his friends. Not really, the group of girls were all hangers-on, trying to get close to Gemma in order to bask in her reflected popularity. And they thought the same of Wagner, who didn't ease their mistrust with his lack of enthusiasm, joining in on their constant, insipid chatter about boys and shopping and boys and schoolyard gossip and boys. But months and years of immersion allowed him to switch to autopilot and his way through any conversation. Hangouts and slumber parties, every day was awash in estrogen, and after the doctor asked him to raise his skirt and drop his panties, the prick that landed on the meaty part of Wagner's rump guaranteed that his body would be as saturated inside as it had been out. 5:30 in the morning. There shouldn't even be a 5:30 in the morning, and yet that's the order the numbers on Wagner's phone had arranged themselves into when he checked the time. He had woken up about a half hour earlier despite having deactivated the alarm that had been the clarion call with which he started each day, also he'd have enough time to do everything he needed to get ready. A half hour of fitful tossing, trying to get back to sleep, but his body had other plans. He rubbed at his eyes and stretched under pillowy soft covers, accidentally knocking a member of the menagerie of stuffed animals that reclined against the headboard onto the carpeted floor. With a sigh, he decided to join the overboard teddy bear, getting out of bed and opening the gauzy, thin-spun curtains that did little to block out the first rays of sun as dawn creeped over the neighborhood. The shadows of night gave way to morning light, turning the dark corners of his room into a soothing light lilac. The purpley tint the walls had been painted when his room was completely refurnished. Looking around, he wistfully remembered the former navy and walnut color scheme, dark wood dresser topped by a sloppily scattered assortment of Pokémon figures and Little League trophies, pictures of fighter planes and terrifying dinosaurs hung all about, all of which had been either boxed up or disposed of. Childish remnants replaced over time by a white dressing table, large mirror edged by photos of friends he couldn't stand to be around, walls covered in posters of pop idols and framed motivational aphorisms in swirly script, clothes moved into an expanded and stuffed closet. Wagner flicked on the light in the walk-in dressing room, surrounded by blouses, skirts, and dresses, neatly arranged rows of shoes and carefully hung bags. He wished that any of his old wardrobe were still there, as if the clothes of a 13-year-old boy might still fit his 18-year-old body. Absent-mindedly, Wagner reached for an outfit, the leggings and wedgie-inducing leotard he was mandated to wear every morning while he completed the daily workout session also ordered by Gemma, before realizing he didn't need them anymore. Keeping the leggings, the only pants-like article he had, the freshly emancipated boy added a spandex cropped vest top and quickly covered it with a light hoodie. He had worn a bra regularly for long enough that strapping one on was no more out of place for him than the panties he pulled up his legs every day or any other piece of clothing he wore, but he still refused to admit the functional necessity for one, telling himself for the millionth time that the perky but sizable mounds that pushed out the front of his sweatshirt were nothing more than undeveloped fat that would fade away in time. Where he thought there was weight to lose on his 118-pound frame was never clear. The house was quiet, Wagner's parents not usually up for another hour or so, and with nothing else to occupy himself, the rudderless boy threw his hair up into a ponytail and laced up a pair of pink-accented sneakers. He cut his jogging route in half, allowing for the lap around the nearby pond where he always enjoyed watching the ducks splash around in the fog and dew. The magnificently painted drakes preened on shore and flapped about while their counterparts, hens with dull brown feathers, were too busy dipping under the surface in search of a meal to be bothered by the males' garish displays. Rounding the corner back home, he settled to a leisurely walk and quietly let himself back into the house. "Good morning, sunshine." Wagner was startled by the deep voice of his father coming from the kitchen, not expecting him to be moving yet. "Morning, Daddy," he greeted his father cheerily, skipping over and pecking a kiss on his cheek, a ritual he couldn't remember how it started and one that he had completed before his mind had time to process what he had done. Wanting to shake off the utterly girlish act and to clean up after his run, Wagner excused himself upstairs to take a shower. Intending to be a quick rinse to wash off the sweat, his hand paused when he reached for his razor. A sudden irritation crept across his skin, the imagined feeling of coarse stubble growing in like coils of dark wire. He found himself lathering up. He was only shaving to prevent the unbearable itchiness he was sure would follow if he didn't. Long-nailed hands smeared cooling lotion into supple flesh with each stroke of shins, calves, and thighs. The feel of silky smooth skin the only thing Wagner lamented giving up. He luxuriated in the sensation while he still could. He got dressed for the second time that morning, replacing the dull sports bra with one more frilly and underwired and tossing a casual shirt dress over his head. Wagner sat at his vanity, brushing out his hair when he was struck by the sight in front of him. This was the first day of the rest of his life, the first in years that Wagner could be a boy, and there he was in a dress, sitting down to do his makeup. Enough was enough, he had to reclaim his masculinity and he had to do so immediately. Off came the dress, bra unhooked and cast into the corner of his room. He dug through his closet, and for all the clothes the sartorial vestibule was filled with, the best he could manage was another pair of leggings and a white and mint-cropped baby tee, a far cry from the old t-shirts he was pining for moments ago, with the words "Daddy's Girl" stamped across his chest, the block letters slightly distorted and stretched across unsupported breasts. Hair back up into a no-fuss pony bursting from his crown, he scrutinized his appearance. A groan rumbled low in his throat, hollow and thin. It was more an anguished moan than a commanding growl. He had vowed to not touch the cosmetics splayed out across the vanity top, but he couldn't bear to look at the flat, splotchy face staring back at him. Just a few touch-ups, some concealer and maybe some dashes of color. But absolutely no more. Approaching 8 o'clock, Wagner headed back down to the kitchen, the bounce in his steps slowly returning. His mother came down to join while he busied himself with portioning out berries and leafy greens to be blended into his daily smoothie. He gave her a smiley, "Hi, Mommy," and a hug from behind on his way to sitting down at the breakfast table across from his father. He twirled the end of his hair around 2 fingers in between sips of his drink and scrolling through his phone, the morning quiet interrupted by a choking sputter from his father. Wagner looked up just in time to see the man averting his eyes. Face red, he muttered about having to get to the office and stalked off from the table. The confused look the naive boy gave his mother was returned with a sympathetic but stern grimace. "Willow, there was that name again, you have to be mindful of how you're dressed." She reached over and patted his hand. "Your poor father, he isn't used to seeing his little girl all grown up." "I'm not a little girl," Wagner thought to himself. "Even if you don't have school today, you still need to put on a bra around here. You're a woman now." "I'm definitely not a woman," he wanted to yell, instead settling for a quiet nod and an embarrassed look down at his own chest, suddenly aware of 2 points making themselves known through the thin fabric of his top. His arms shot up seeking some sort of modesty while his mother tried and failed to stifle a giggle. "Oh my God! Mommy, that is so not funny," he whined, mortified. "Sure it is, sweetie. It's just something all us women learn sooner or later. You just happened to learn it later," his mother said, getting up to clear her dishes and stooping to plant a kiss on the top of Wagner's head. Both parents had left for work, leaving their sun-turned daughter alone in the house. The shame of breakfast replayed in his mind, pushing to rid himself of all the girly trappings that surrounded him. He surveyed his room, a desire to tear down the posters, bin the stuffed animals, and blacken the walls tempered by a burning spike in the back of his head that prevented him from disobeying Gemma. She had sworn that she wouldn't interfere any longer, that he was free to do whatever he wanted, but it was too soon to be certain. Maybe the closet. He had more than enough clothes, and beginning the process of purging would be little risk. Even if he found himself back in that hated position, the closet was big and there was plenty of space to save a few things for an emergency. Wagner justified the decision: a few skirts, maybe a couple pairs of shoes, the dress he had worn to prom a week earlier, still hanging in a dry-cleaning bag with the matching strappy sandals sat at its foot. It would be a waste to throw all of it away. Memories flooded Wagner's mind at the thought of the dress, a blush pink strapless confection of sequins and organza. It was practically sewn onto him, the diet that Gemma insisted he undertake to fit into it almost driving him mad with its restrictions. No carbs, no salt, basically nothing that wasn't raw or steamed, so there would be no chance of bloating or water retention. He did it because he had to, but it was also a last-ditch attempt to look like the perfect prom princess. The only shot he had at swinging the vote in his favor, prevailing over Gemma and gaining his reprieve. Things didn't go that way, they never could, and his only consolation for the effort, the dream gown and to die for figure, was a spot as a runner-up and an overly amorous date. His date, Tad Mitchum, one of the more popular guys in school, had to have been put up to it. Wagner wasn't sure what dirt Gemma had on him, but it must have been bad enough to get Tad to ask this person who he knew was really a boy to go with him. The tacit understanding to not mention the shared arrangement at least allowed the night to feel more normal. Wagner was able to relax to the degree he ever could, just try to be in the moment, and even accepted the offer to dance. The first was a fast song. He and Tad joined their group of friends, Gemma and the other girls along with their dates. It was actually fun, Wagner barely troubled while keeping up in his 4-inch stilettos. Then another song. And before he knew it, he was still out on the dance floor when the lights dimmed and the beat slowed. Two bodies welded against each other under the watchful gaze of busybody teachers chaperoning the affair. Wagner rested his head on the larger boy's shoulder, a contented sigh escaped him. Regardless of the outcome of the vote, he was determined to at least enjoy one night of his high school life, and held in Tad's strong arms he felt like he could let most of his worries fade away. He didn't balk when a stiffening member pressed against his belly, or recoil when his lips were drawn into a lingering and probing kiss. His first kiss. Limits were tested and thresholds continued to be crossed, long after the ballroom had cleared. After Gemma had been crowned prom queen to nobody's surprise, the two found themselves alone together upstairs in the hotel room that Tad had said was for the group but was clearly reserved for the handsome couple. He had to do it. Not just for himself and the Armageddon that Gemma would unleash on his life if he didn't follow through, but to make sure Tad didn't suffer whatever similar fate he must have had dangling over his head. Wagner didn't enjoy it, but he also couldn't say it was wholly unpleasant. Ultimately it was a night he wanted to forget, grateful that the cleaners were able to get out the stain from the pretty dress so there was no lasting evidence and he could at least pretend that part of the evening was all a hazy dream. Back in the present, the day had mostly slipped away, the distractions of bittersweet reminders and summer boredom sapped the listless boy's vitality. He never realized how removing Gemma's control would leave him with no direction. No purpose, feeling so isolated and alone. He didn't know why, but it wasn't until the staccato, pulsing tones were halted that he had second thoughts about making the call. Wagner? The stunning beauty of his longtime tormentor filled the phone screen. He tried to reply, to say hey or something equally noncommittal, but all that he managed to push out was a gurgled cough. Or is it Willow? Gemma probed, not teasing but genuinely curious. You know you don't have to do this stuff anymore, her gesture indicating the made-up boy was lost outside the frame of the FaceTime app. So what's up? I figured you'd be busy writing your valedictorian speech. Wagner looked across the vanity to the crumpled paper that had unfolded itself to lay face up, a list of names and ranks printed in chipped black ink. Willow Jane Bryant, the top of the heap, sat one place above Gemma Whitney Marshall. Yeah. Pretty crazy that it's not you. He was at a loss, trying to make sense of why he called Gemma in the first place. You don't have to rub it in. I can't believe they counted the extra credit overcoming hardship stuff for your GPA, she said with a huff, failing to hide how much finally losing to her plaything bothered her. Your makeup looks good, by the way. You always were good at doing eyes. Thanks, I guess. Not as good as me, of course. But that still doesn't explain why you're wearing makeup. Wagner winced at the pointed observation. I'm not, he pleaded. Well, I am, but like not really. It's just like to cover up some spots. And your brows, and a little mascara, and some lip plumper. What did you skip? I didn't do my hair, he responded sharply, searching for something to get his footing back. So? A ponytail? You could have cut it all off. Gemma's retort was biting. You could have thrown all the makeup in the trash, gone out first thing to get some jeans and t-shirts. Swung by the barber shop, or, hell, get a pair of scissors. Why didn't you? Because you made me. You made me do all this stuff every day. The idea was incoherent, but that didn't stop the anguished boy from believing it. What does that have to do with anything? All I heard from you for years was how much you hated all of this. How much you couldn't wait to go back to being a boy. Gemma's lips curled into a devilish smirk, reveling in the pain and confusion splashed across her phone. Well? Looks like I was helping you out this whole time. Shut up. Then do something about this, Wagner. She spit the name with disgust. Or maybe you want me to go back to telling you what to do. Maybe you need me to take control. Fine. The shrill cry Dopplered out of range as the scene on Gemma's screen shifted violently. Wagner was gone from the frame with the camera pointing unsteadily in so many different directions. The chaos came to a halt a moment later. Wagner's lithe form shone horizontal and pushed to the bottom of the screen, the view of his phone looking up at him from the countertop it was set on. He rummaged through a drawer, the clanks and bangs of unseen implements, yanking something out before picking his phone back up. You want me to do something? Then I'll do something. The gleam of steel flashed in his hand as he reached behind his head, grasping the end of his ponytail and pulling it straight up towards the ceiling. His audience of one sat silent on the other end of the video connection, offering only a cold stare. Wagner's ragged breathing was the lone noise in the house as the blades closed in on the multicolored hair stretched taut. Inching, trembling, then all at once a deafening snip. Sweetheart. Are you ready? One more second. Your father has the car all packed, so make sure you're not forgetting anything. It's a 5-hour drive and I'm not mailing your favorite pillow if you leave it behind. Wagner stuck his tongue out, his reflection in the mirror mimicking his annoyance. The closet had been cleared out, devoid of the dresses and skirts, rows and rows of shoes and boots, drawers stuffed with all manner of silky and lacy lingerie that had called it home. Let's go, sunshine. The gruff voice of his father called through the open bedroom window. A clunk thudded from the driveway, the last of the army of suitcases that all of that clothing had been loaded into was sealed up safely in the SUV. Dagger nails fluffed his hair, the shoulder-length bob settling right back into place, glossed lips smacked, and he gave his reflection an eye-shut-out wink. He smoothed the skirt of his dress around his hips and thighs. Slipping on a pair of thin-soled sandals, he breezed downstairs. Ready, Mommy, he presented himself to his exasperated parent, who responded with a frown. Really now, Willow? Are you trying to give your father a heart attack? She pulled at the neckline of her son's flouncy dress, trying in vain to rest the light fabric above the cleavage on display. Wagner readjusted the top, picking a bra strap back into place. Mommy, I'm not a little kid anymore, and this is how college girls dress. Well, you're not at college yet, Missy. Maybe you could get something to cover up, at least until after your father isn't around to see all the boys leering at you. Mom, he whinged. Fine, I think I have a cardigan upstairs. He dashed back to his bedroom. Make it quick, she yelled after him. The front door closed and Wagner could hear his parents outside discussing the plan for the long drive ahead of them, when his phone binged and booped for a FaceTime call. Hey, Willow. Gemma was sitting in an empty bedroom, not too different from the state Wagner's was in. Good morning, mistress, he intoned back with a smile shortly after closing his window. A pause for an imperceptible shiver. God, I'll never get tired of hearing that. She collected herself. So we're heading out in a little bit. I've got to stop by the rental office on campus to pick up the microwave and mini fridge, but we should be all set with everything. Cool, we're leaving now, so I'll probably get to the dorm a little before you, roomie. Arranging for the two to be roommates was fairly trivial. Wagner already had years of documentation proving he was successfully able and willing to live as a female. All of his school records, including his diploma, were in his chosen name. The last thing the college needed was solved with a trip to the county courthouse and another to the DMV. "Excuse me?" The friendly banter turned icy in a heartbeat. Wagner tensed up. "Sorry. I meant Mistress Rumi." The cherubic smile creeped back onto his face. "I'll allow it. This time." She shook her head, amused. Wagner held his phone out at arm's length so as much of his entire self as possible was in the camera's eye. "Come on, mistress," hip-cocked, hand held behind his head, "face it, you can't get enough of me." "Of course not, pet. After all, I made you."